The 2025 FXR Pro Fish Bassmaster Elite on the St. Johns River is upon us right now. That means the 2025 season is starting for the Bassmaster Elite Series. That's Ronnie Moore. I'm Tommy Sanders. The day we've been waiting for, Ronnie, we're ready to kick it off, and it's going to be on us before we know it. This is going to be, what about the 5th straight year in a row we've had an event on the St. Johns River?
Yeah, the St. Johns River is kind of like our Daytona 500, Tommy. It kicks off the season every year. It's very close to the Daytona, honestly. But it is a place that's got a lot of history. Well before the Elite Series was started, it was one of the founding venues, one of the big fish capitals of the world. For the longest time, it was the place you came if you wanted to break a double-digit mark. Some of our Elite Series pros, like a Greg Hagney, have broke double digits here at the St. Johns River for single fish. But Tommy, is a place we know so well, but it is a little different every time we come here.
Absolutely.
In the past, there had been a ton of grass, and then now that had disappeared for it. We've had Rodman in play in past years, not a factor this year. It is not in the playing field. Also, high water and tides are things that we look at. The tide is minimal, but if that wind or hurricanes keeps a lot of water in the system, that water is a little bit higher than normal. It'll fish a little bit different than it has in the years past.
That's right. And of course, the 27th time, I think, that the Bassmasters has been there to this, as you alluded to. And it's, of course, the statistics. The measurements don't change. 300-plus miles going from south to north there. We're concerned with about 100 miles of it there, which contains the second largest lake in the state of Florida, Lake George, and a lot of other waterways. Again, Lake Rodman is out of it again. Now, how is that going to change things?
Well, I think one thing that a big decision that in the offseason a lot of fans and anglers questioned with Bass was how are we going to do the schedule to not necessarily minimize forward-facing sonar, but make it more diverse.
Yeah, spread it out.
In April, we saw one angler survive in the top 10 in Rodman. That was Jacob Fouts, and he was exclusively fishing offshore with his electronics and a jig head minnow, things like that. Also worked in some topwater. But in February, I could see this place being dominated if the river was fishing tough in Rodman, because it is much more of a stable lake rather than a river, deeper as well. Those fish can group up. And so when it's winter time, Rodman can really factor for this event. So it's out of play, off limits, all river based. And I think that's going to allow a lot of those places. We saw Crescent show up the last couple years, especially this last time. That was a shad spawn deal in 2024. Not going to be a shad spawn deal most likely this time around, because obviously that was an April event. But you've got Crescent, you've got George, you've got down below Woodruff and the river, all those lakes. You saw as far as Bay Springs Lake or whatever it was called, that John Cox and Gary Klaus in the past have gone to. You can go as far south as you want, which is actually making your headway towards the top of the St. Johns River, or you can go as far as Jacksonville if you want. We've seen some guys like Cliff Prince in the past, Lee Livesey, some anglers make their way from the takeoff in Palatka. They go left. Not many people go left, but if you go left, you'll have a lot of water to yourself.
February 10th through the 13th, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. April is what you talked about a little bigger. That's when our man right here, Cory Johnston, knocked it out of the park. In fact, he didn't even have to fish the final day. He wins by 20 pounds.
And one big deal with that, we mentioned April, the two events that were 90-plus pounds. Rick Clunn's 2019 win, that was almost 100 pounds, and then Cory last year winning by a 20-pound margin and having 93 pounds. Those are a little bit of anomalies, but the thing that coincides with that is warming trends. Obviously, April, very solid, stable weather. It was warm, for months leading up to that. Different than we'd ever been there. But that year Rick Clunn almost broke 100. It was very cold rolling into the tournament, and then all of a sudden, a big warming trend happened. All those fish moved shallow, and we saw some of the biggest fish, biggest bags, and the biggest overall winning weight at the St. Johns we've had in history. Here's what the forecast looks like. Tommy, the 16th, 17th, and 18th, those are the practice days for the Elite Series. 19th's an off day, and then this is day 1 through 3. Obviously, the 23rd is Championship Sunday. We worry a little bit less once you get into the final day of the tournament with weather. It's how are we going to make hay early in the week. It's been very stable in the Palatka region at the St. Johns, in the 70s and in the 50s for the lows. We see a little bit of a change, though. Of course, it's tournament week. The Bassmasters show up. We're going to get some cold front.
Something cold.
It looks like the weekend rolling into practice, right after Valentine's Day, it starts to be post-frontal, and we see 17th and 18th, the Monday and Tuesday. It gets down to the 50s and 40s. Then it starts to come back on their off day, and then we see somewhat stable 60s to upper 40s, low 50s overall. So the highs aren't nearly as high as we'd like them to be, but at least during the tournament, the lows don't touch that 3 mark, the 39, 38, 30. We do not want that at the St. Johns River. So I will say temper your weight expectations. Maybe we are seeing an explosion. I know they've planted grass, but I know the water's been high since the hurricanes last year. Maybe there's grass taking hold there, but the one big deal, weather dependent. If those water temperatures and the air temperatures rise, we could see 80s, maybe 90-pound weights, but probably going to be in the mid-70s to low 80s.
All right, with that in mind, let's think about some names we might be looking at through here. Here's a couple of familiar faces.
Man, two solid guys wherever you go, but Brandon Lester and Greg Hackney, they are the first two anglers that come to my mind when we think about the St. John's. Ironically enough, neither one of them have won on the St. John's, Tommy, but consistency is so very difficult, and these two are about as consistent as you can get. In his time fishing the Opens and the Elite Series, Tommy, in the state of Florida, Brandon Lester's fished 24 or so events, and he has gotten 13 top 25s.
Picked up his first win.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The Kissimmee chain, not far from where we are. He has done well there and won. Harris chain, Okeechobee, St. John's River. Brandon Lester, Brandon Pollock's not a bad pick either. But
no,
Brandon Lester, rock solid in the state of Florida. And Greg Hackney, probably the best angler on the St. John's River. He's caught a couple double-digit fish, the biggest ones he's ever caught in the Elite Series, and he's almost in our top 10 every single time we show up. He's gotten 2 or 3 second-place finishes to guys like Rick Clunn. You would love to get over the hump. Hey, Rick's not in our field this year, Greg. That's a good thing for you because you always finish runner-up to him.
And we think of Hackney, watching him fish through the years, that we think they're long row cypress, endless cypress trees,
absolutely,
working those like a master, and also backing it up with some work in the canals there, like around places like Wheelock and San Mateo, places like that.
Absolutely, and when you say those canals and those dead-end creeks and things like that at the St. John's, it also makes me think about names like Drew Benton, names like Drew Cook, John Cox that are great sight fishermen, and also Jake Whitaker has a great track record, especially when he's in the canals at the St. John's. So we'll see if any of those other dark horses show up, but these are two anglers that Rapala Bassmaster Fantasy Fishing, got to keep them on your radar.
Absolutely. Now, again, two not dark horses there. Let's talk about some other names, the Johnston brothers.
Yes.
I'm thinking Chris Johnston this time around. These guys work it with such finesse. I mean, it was fun to watch him on that final day, just sort of bumping around, assuring himself a top 5 finish. He makes it look easy. These guys, when they came down from Canada, the very first year, 2019, we thought, hey, they're going to be like Canadians that kind of freaked out by this warm water, No, they ate it alive. And they've been doing so ever since.
They're great visual sight fishermen. They're great with their electronics. They're great flippers and pitchers as well. They do that in Canada so frequently. We'll see how it is. Obviously, Cory's going to be a high-picked angler for fantasy fishing because he won the last time we were here. But we remember this. In April, we were shocked that Salt Springs was left almost all alone to Cory. In February, that's the first place people check. So I don't know if he'll have it to himself this year.
Yeah.
We will see. Unless those fish pull back with the cold front and show back up on the off day, someone who makes a gamble there on Thursday could be in luck. But that'll be a thing, sight fish, those canals. But there's a couple other baits. Let's talk about some other techniques that'll work. So if we are, let's just say, river bar dependent, you think about those guys in the twists and turns, those shell bars. You got to think a jerkbait's probably going to factor, whether it's a deep diving jerkbait or a shallow one, depending on where you're fishing. If you're fishing off the drop or up on the flat of those shell bars and things like that. So maybe a Rapala Maverick. I think a Storm Arashi Vibe, a lipless crankbait, something that you can move. We saw Brad Watley use a lipless crankbait great in 2024. Also, we mentioned it, those canals, those sight fish, a wacky rig, a weightless wacky rig is absolutely phenomenal. I would love to say a spinnerbait. Possibly so. We saw it used so heavily, but it was during a shad spawn. But you got to think, if a spinnerbait doesn't factor, probably a bladed jig will factor for some anglers. We obviously will have people who flip and pitch. There'll be people out in the river using their electronics as well. We just wonder how grouped up some of these schools will be, because once it starts to get warm, maybe the first, second wave of fish head shallow for the spawn. They get broken up a little bit, but if we see some guys, maybe we'll see a little frog action top water too.
I wouldn't hate that.
That
would be a lot of fun. The 2025 FXR Pro Fish Bassmaster League kicking off the season for the Bassmaster Elite Series. You can watch it on Bassmaster.com right here. Also on Roku on Thursday and Friday. Of course, Saturday and Sunday will be on FS1 and right here on Bassmaster.com.
So you're saying that if someone can't catch the action, that's only their fault since it's in so many places.
That's the essence of it. You have distilled it perfectly. We will see you there. Thanks for watching us on the Live Well, presented by Rapala.